Okay, so welcome back from the weekend, grade 12s. So second last lecture that I'll be giving out. I'll be giving out a lecture next week as well, but there won't be any learning check. So this will be the last learning check, and I have to do all my marks, so I need all your learning checks in by Sunday. Now, if you don't turn in a learning check, you get a no mark on it. It doesn't go in as a 0, but any ones that you do want me to mark, you need to get into me by Sunday. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is the endocrine system, which is another kind of organ system that controls hormones. But before we do that, I'm just going to kind of recap the nervous system because I've kind of watched back my lecture from last week. And I mean, it's just really hard because I'm kind of rushing through things and I'm not doing a really thorough job of explaining it. So I just kind of wanted to recap just kind of the big ideas of the nervous system before we move on to the endocrine system. But today's lecture primarily is going to be on the endocrine system, which is basically hormonal control of homeostasis. It still kind of revolves around this idea of homeostasis and keeping, this constant set points inside our body, but it's using a different kind of system besides the nervous system. Okay, so this slide I'm going to try and kind of explain the key ideas of the nervous system. So one thing that's really handy when we do in biology is doing little charts like this. So if you look at the top right, it kind of just breaks down the nervous system, and then this is basically a concept map. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go through and kind of explain each part. So the nervous system really kind of breaks down to two parts, and that's what you can see coming out here. Okay, and we're going to start with the simpler part, which is the central nervous system. So the central nervous system is composed of two things, which is just the brain and the spinal cord. So I'm just going to highlight those in red. So obviously this is where our brain is, and then the spinal cord going down. Okay. Now they don't have really any. They have very few sensors in there, especially in the spinal cord. There is a lot more in the brain, but mostly that's kind of a receiving and kind of the control center of the nervous system. Okay, so the other part that I'm going to talk about is the peripheral nervous system. Now, the peripheral nervous system, it's all your neurons that are basically not on your spine and in your brain. So it's like throughout your entire body. Okay, so everywhere that you have, neurons running through your body, which is everywhere, that's what we call the peripheral nervous system. Okay, now the peripheral nervous system does a couple things. Okay, we're going to kind of start there. The peripheral nervous system has really neurons that send things to the spinal cord, and that's what we call these things called the sensory neurons. So what sensory neurons are the kind of neurons, and I'm going to do these in red. Okay. Sorry, not red, because I did one in red, I'll do it in green. They're kind of basically neurons that only send information this way. So they send them to the spinal cord and to the brain. They are basically our sensors. Okay, so now we have sensors all over our body. We have our primary sensors are in our head, which are basically our eyes, okay, and then our ears, then our taste, and our nose. Sorry, our mouth and our nose. So these are our primary sensors, okay, our five senses. Now, we also have, all sensors for touch throughout our body. So we have all kinds of different touch sensors throughout your body, and then as well as different heat sensors and cold sensors. And all these little sensors are embedded in our skin, and they basically send information to the brain and spinal cord, to the CNS. Okay? And again, so that's part of the peripheral nervous system, and all these sensory neurons basically just send information to the spinal cord and the brain. Now, I'm just going to so let's go back here. Now, again, I don't want you to forget about the senses because that's our primary sensors that are going information into the brain. So those are the two things right here. Now, the other part of the peripheral nervous system is once your brain or your central nervous system decides what to do, it has to send a signal back. So there's also other signals, and I'm going to try and do this kind of in black, that go the opposite direction. They go from, if you look down here in the bottom right, they go from the brain to the spinal cord to the muscle or to a gland or to an organ. So they're basically going the opposite direction of the sensors. So in all these little neurons, you have some of them going this way, back to the brain, and then you have some of them going this way to muscles and to glands. Okay, and that's the basics of the peripheral nervous system. That's all really it does. Okay? So the basic idea is the peripheral nervous system sends information to the CNS thinks about it, and then sends information back to the peripheral nervous system to take care of things. Okay, now we have a couple things that break down. We have the peripheral nervous system, there's two parts to it. Because some of the sensing that we do voluntarily, okay, we can purposely look at things, we can purposely, touch things. So some of those senses come through voluntarily, like that we choose, right? And that's called the somatic nervous system. So they're the senses that you control, the ones that you want your brain to experience, right? Now, also, there's other things that we can't be constantly taking in information, like we can't be worrying about how fast our heartbeat is or how fast we're breathing. So there's other sensors that are just automatic, okay? And even some of your sight's automatic. You don't have to think of where to look. Your brain actually takes care of that for you. It actually moves your eyeballs all over the place without you thinking about where they have to move. And that's because it's part of the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic is non-voluntary sensing and affecting. So all of the sensory information coming back that you don't have to think about, and then all of the control that gets sent back you also don't have to think about. That's the autonomic. And then the other one is the one that you control, which is called somatic. So that would be like, you deciding, I want to look there, even though your body will automatically just start moving your eyes. If you purposely go to look at something, that's you taking control over your somatic. But if you just let your brain just kind of control where you're going to look without thinking about it, that's your autonomic. Okay. Now, there's one section that we break down. The autonomic then gets broken down into two types, okay? Because these are things that are automatically taking place. You don't have to think about them, they just do it. And the two types are basically what we call fight or flight, which is sympathetic, which means that your body basically ramps up and gets kind of like your metabolism really starts cranking. You start creating tons of energy. Your senses are going full blast. It's basically the idea is that you are about to fight or have to flee, so that your body's preparing for that. So it sends a signal out to all the different organs saying, this is what we have to do. We have to fight or run right now, so get ready for it. Okay? Now, the opposite is when you have to calm down. And you have to do the exact opposite. You have to say, okay, we don't have to do anything right now. We need to rest. And that's very important that you need to rest at these certain points, just especially during sleep. And that's how your body says to all your organs, it's time to relax and rest and digest your food, called sit and digest. So that's the basics of the nervous system. Okay, as quick as I could do it. For a second here, I'm going to show you. So here's an example. So inside your skin, you have little sensors right here, like for heat. So that when something's hot, you can feel that, and that little sensor goes off, and it sends a signal, which is called an action potential, down to your spinal cord and then into your brain, and your brain kind of interprets that as, oh, that's hot. Okay, you have other ones for pain. So if when you feel pain, it's these sensors are going off. Okay, and we have different numbers of pain receptors in different areas, so it's a lot more painful to say cut your hand because you have a lot of pain sensors than say cut your back or your shoulder, because you don't have very many sensors there. And that's also why for nursing they do certain injections like in certain areas so that there's not a lot of pain sensors, so it's less painful. You have also receivers for cold. You also have receivers just for general touch, so that's just mechanical pressure, so just feeling that people are touching you. So all these sensors are in your body, and they're just basically, here I'm going to highlight this in kind of red, they're basically just sending information back to your CNS and to your brain. Okay? And they can only go one direction. You can't send information both ways, so you're going to send all those senses back. All right, one more picture of senses. Yeah, here's another one. So this is kind of a close-up of your skin. And all these little things right here, these are your nerves, and all these are little sensors. So underneath your skin, okay? It's just a very close-up view showing you where all these little neurons go, okay? So they're all going to send information, again, back to your spinal cord into your brain. So, okay. Let's go now onto the endocrine system. So the primary purpose of the endocrine system, okay, it's very similar to the nervous system. It's basically to control all the organs. It's basically a communication system to make sure that all the organs are doing their job to make sure homeostasis is in control. So it's kind of just like a project manager, very similar to what the nervous system is, but it's just a different form of communication. So if you recall, the nervous system's main purpose is to allow cell-to-cell communication. Since cells are doing different purposes in the body, like different organs are doing different jobs, they need to be communicated together, and that's really kind of what the nervous system does. Okay? So the nervous system is, you can think of it as the phone lines of the body. It connects directly, like the brain directly, a neuron all the way to the heart, and the brain a neuron that connects all the way to the stomach. Okay, so these are like actual phone lines. I know we don't really have phone lines very much anymore, but like they're actually like solid connections directly from the brain all the way to the different parts. Okay. Now, the problem with communicating this way, though, is what if you have to send a message that lasts for 6 hours? Like, say you need to, you have to fight somebody, but it's going to last for an hour. You're going to go for a run for an hour. The nervous system can't be constantly sending that signal to keep your heart rate up, and constantly sending that signal to get your breathing rate up, and constantly sending all of these different signals. The brain can send it once, but then it's an electrical signal, and the signal's gone. What if you want the signals maintained? If you want that signal to last, like kind of like what's more very similar to like a radio broadcast or a TV broadcast, where that signal is just going to all parts of the body for an hour or 5 hours or even 3 days, or in the purpose of puberty, say 3 or 4 years. Right? That signal can't come from the nervous system. It has to come from a different system called the endocrine. Okay? It's kind of the way that you can think of humans only communicate through direct one-to-one communication. Imagine the government had to contact say there was an emergency, the government had to contact everybody by their phone call. That would take forever. It'd be a lot better to just do a radio broadcast, or to do a TV broadcast or an internet broadcast that kind of projects to everybody all simultaneously. That's like the endocrine system. Okay, so the purpose of the endocrine is when a generic message needs to be sent or broadcast to numerous cells in the body, the nervous system isn't the best form of communication. Similar to how if a tornado was coming to Blenheim, individual phone calls to reach each person would not be the most efficient way to broadcast the message. A much better way to release that signal message received would be to do like a single TV broadcast that reaches a whole bunch of people at the same time. And that's what the endocrine system does. It's a way of communicating one message to a whole bunch of different cells all at the same time via hormones. Okay, so the endocrine system basics consists of the endocrine glands, and these are basically organs that release liquids, and it's a liquid message, okay, and that's what a hormone is. It's basically this little liquid that comes out like testosterone or endocrine, and that's the message. Okay? They're called hormones, and that's what they are. They're basically liquid messages. Hormones are chemical messengers released into the blood to initiate the effector. So that's how we get them around. We use our bloodstream to carry these messages to different parts of the body, which is a lot slower than like if you use a nervous system, because you have to wait for your heart to pump all of that blood to your feet or to your brain. So although the nervous system can also initiate an effector, okay, the endocrine system generally has. So the difference, when we kind of look at the endocrine system and we compare it to the nervous system, the endocrine system has longer lasting effects. It can last, for years. It can last for days, where the nervous system can't send a signal out constantly like that. It takes a little bit longer to initiate because you have to make the chemical. Okay, you have to release it into the bloodstream, and then you have to wait for the blood to carry it to that organ. And then you have to have that organ receive the message, and then understand the message, and then probably make a protein, which takes a little bit of time. So it's slower to initiate, way slower compared to an action potential. But the big advantage is it can affect a broad range of cells. You don't have to send a message to every single cell. You can send out the message and just get into the blood, and then it'll send a message to every part of the body, every organ in the body, all simultaneously. Okay, so when we compare the endocrine and the nervous system, and that's the biggest part of this lesson that I'm trying to get across, is the comparison between the two. So say the body requires that all muscles increase their supply of glucose. Right? Say that's what the body needs. We are working out, and we are running out of glucose in the cells, and we need our supply of glucose. If we didn't have the endocrine system, we had to use the nervous system. This is how we would have to do that. Each muscle cell would need to individually be stimulated by a neuron to increase glucose. You would have to send that message through an action potential to each cell. Okay? Then you would also constantly be having to send that message, because that action potential hits that cell and then stops. Then you'd have to send another one that would hit that cell and stop. So this would be tons and tons of action potentials and tons of neurons all connected to all these different muscle cells in the body. And it'd be very, very taxing on your body and your brain to be able to do that. Now, that's not how we do it, though. We have the endocrine system, because you're going to hear how much better of a system this is. Basically, for this to work, we basically just release a chemical into the bloodstream. You know this chemical, it's called insulin. Okay, we release this insulin into the bloodstream, and when insulin contacts any muscle cell, it basically tells that muscle cell to absorb glucose out of the bloodstream. Okay, and then it can go through the entire body, so you're going to be absorbing in your arms and in your legs and in your abdomen, and all the muscle cells are all getting that message at the same time from from insulin. Insulin is the message to absorb glucose. Okay, so we have over 200 unique hormones that control everything from blood sugar, blood pressure, metabolism, even our immune response. The following glands exclusively work as endocrine, so they're very exclusive. Pituitary. So a lot of some people who have like even metabolic disorders have issues with their pituitary gland. The thyroid gland is also in your neck. That's also related to metabolism. Pituitary is in your brain. Parathyroid. It's just underneath the thyroid. The adrenals, that's the other one that we should pay attention to, which is just on top of your kidneys. So these are your main glands for your endocrine. These are the ones that are kind of really controlling it in your brain, in your throat, and then at the top of each of your kidneys. Now there's some other ones that are also important. They just have multiple functions. They don't just do endocrine, they do other things. The hypothalamus, which is definitely a term, it's also right in the middle of your brain. It does a lot of different things, like a tremendous number of different things. Very, very important part of our brain. Then we have our thymus, again, just kind of the lower part of the throat. Your pancreas, so that's kind of what your pancreas does, releases like things like glucagon and insulin. Your testes if you're a male, and then ovaries if you're a female. They also release hormones like testosterone and estrogen, and those are messages to like enter puberty, or messages to grow chest hair, or to grow bone length. Okay? Different things that happen at puberty. I'm going to kind of just skip over this just because I know that I'm kind of going along here. So this is kind of really kind of how a hormone works. Basically, you take a cell, like in a gland, it makes the hormone, releases it into the bloodstream travels down, and then whatever cell is the target cell receives the hormone. So kind of the case of insulin, this would be like the pancreatic cell releasing insulin into the bloodstream, insulin travels down. This is like the target cell is your muscle cell. Your muscle cell gets the message from insulin, then starts taking up glucose from the bloodstream. Okay, this would be also something we're definitely not going to go through today. This is just kind of all these different hormones that are inside our body. So I'm just going to kind of mention them to you by name just so that you've ever hear them. So thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, that controls kind of your metabolism. ACTH is kind of like your hormone to tell your body that you're thirsty. HGH to grow, to increase their bone lengths. LH and FSH are kind of for hormonal development, as well as for the menstrual cycle. It's very important, kind of controlling when females are going to release their egg each month. Oxytocin induces pregnancy, as well as it's supposed to be considered the hormone for love. So when people feel this love for somebody, what that actually is a release of oxytocin inside your brain. Thyroxine in T3 and T4 are both metabolism. Calcitonin, controlling how much calcium is in your body, so releasing calcium or absorbing it in your bones. Again, we'll just kind of keep going on here. So there's two different types of hormones. There's hormones that go directly into our cells. They're called like steroid, because you remember that our plasma membrane over here is going to be all lipids. So anything that's also lipid will be able to pass directly through those. And those are what steroid hormones are. So those are like testosterone, estrogen, cortisol. Cortisol is related in our stress response. So when you get really stressed out, what's kind of causing your whole body to recognize that you're stressed, and then all the different things that happen to you when you are stressed, that's all caused by this hormone called cortisol. Now we do need a little bit of cortisol in our body, otherwise you would never worry about anything. So you need to have some stress in your life, you just don't want to have. We also have water-soluble hormones, and these are things like epinephrine, HGH, insulin, and these are ones that have to basically land on the outside of the cell, on those receptors. So you remember like carriers, like those protein channels, they have to land on there before they can actually get inside the cell. They can't just go right through the plasma membrane like steroids can. So this is just kind of an example of it happening. So this would be like a protein. See, like a protein receptor. Epinephrine comes in, lands on this protein receptor, and then epinephrine is like adrenaline. So then this would initiate a whole bunch of response, like basically stop making glycogen, break down it, all turn it into glucose. We're going to ramp up cellular respiration. We're going to make a ton of ATP, because that's what epinephrine does. It basically gives you, or adrenaline, it gives you kind of just getting to the end. And I really just want you to know the big ideas of, the basics of what the endocrine system does and how it relates to the nervous system. So I know I went basically a huge rush of energy. So again, something we're not going to spend very much time on, but the ultimate control of the endocrine system is basically this part in your brain called the hypothalamus, and then this thing called the anterior pituitary, which is also in the brain. And they control just a really ton of hormones, just a tremendous amount. And so that's just kind of the main ones that, if we were in flew through it, on kind of focus on. I mean, I know I'm long today. Let's go over this. So that's the kind of the basics. I will keep the learning check short this week. Thanks.